Hello everyone, welcome to SI UK India webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We are now live with Abertay University. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr Natalie Coull. I'm head of the Cybersecurity Division at Abertay University, where we teach students about ethical hacking and cybersecurity. I've been a cybersecurity lecturer for about 15 years now. When I'm not teaching, I do research in secure software development. I'm currently working on a research project with some health organisations looking at helping to protect patient health data that's currently being used for COVID projects, so that we can make sure that researchers are able to access the data through machine learning algorithms so that they can work out what kind of drugs would work without being able to identify the patient. Okay, so I was asked to come along and talk to you today about cybersecurity. So I thought that I'd start with looking at the cybersecurity threat and try and get a better understanding of who the enemy is and what it is that they're trying to steal. I've got a couple of interesting case studies that I'd like to talk to you about, and then we'll look at the implications of this for the future. So we're a small university based in the city of Dundee, which is on the east coast of Scotland. We've got undergraduate degrees in ethical hacking and cybersecurity, and we've also got a master's degree in ethical hacking and cybersecurity. We're certified by the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is the government security agency, and we're also recognised by them as an academic centre of excellence in cybersecurity education with Gold Award, which I'm very proud of. And we're also just about to commence our Cyber Quarter project, which is an 18 million investment in establishing the Cyber Quarter at Abertay, which will be a hub for students and industry engagement. So in case any of you are sceptical about how bad the cybersecurity threat is, I've collated some recent statistics for you here where we can see the huge challenges that we're facing with new malware being created. So last month alone, there were 6 new unique strains of malware discovered every second. We also saw that IoT, i.e. Internet of Things devices, experience an average of 5,200 attacks every month, and that's per device. So there was also a report of organisations which was published in 2019, which revealed that 62% of organisations had experienced phishing and social engineering attacks. Also in that report, we saw organisations revealed that 34% of their data breaches involved what they called internal actors, which are people who are based actually inside the organisations as a so-called trusted employee. So we can see that this shows the malicious threat isn't just somebody that's necessarily outside the organisation. We also saw that 53% of the companies reported that they have over 1,000 sensitive assets. So this could be things like customers' credit card numbers, personal information. It might also be intellectual property documents, which were easily accessible to every single employee in the organisation, which obviously isn't good security practice. Only those employees who need access to that information to do their job should have that access. Okay, so let's turn our attention at the moment towards malicious hackers. So we know that a lot of hacking activities are orchestrated by organised criminal gangs who use cybercrime to make money and fund other illegal activities. So it's well known, in fact, that criminal gangs can make more money from cybercrime than they can from selling drugs. So the internet offers these criminals advantages over other types of crime in that they don't have to be physically present to commit the cybercrime, and they can use the internet to reach victims in every country with little risk of getting caught and a very high financial return. So one of the biggest advantages of using the internet to commit crime is that the internet provides us with a degree of anonymity. We can't see the people who are behind these malicious attacks and who's trying to scam us online, but the profile of an average cyber criminal might actually surprise you. So the average age of somebody who's arrested in the UK under suspicion of committing a crime is 39, whereas the average age of someone arrested under suspicion of committing a cybercrime in the UK is actually only 17 years old. So a typical malicious hacker is much more likely to be a teenager, and teenagers are in fact behind many high-profile cybersecurity breaches. For example, the high-profile TalkTalk breach, which cost £42 million, the hacking of the Pentagon's ARPANET computer, and the hacking of the United States Department of Defense computer systems were all hacked by teenagers who don't fit the typical criminal mold. So typically they get into this via computer gaming, a desire to find cheats and mods for their games takes them into the dark web, where they then end up stumbling upon details of hacking, which then takes them, they morph into cybercrime through trying to gain access to systems that they're not authorized for or writing code for malware. So organized gangs are using malicious hackers to make money. So unlike the career criminals, teenage hackers, sorry, I think something's gone wrong with my timing there. Teenage hackers are not typically motivated by money. That's not why they break into computer systems and write malware. They're doing this because they like taking risks and they want to test their skills. But organized gangs are using teenage hackers for their own gain, and they'll ask them to create malicious code or get access to systems on their behalf. So what is it that the hackers and organized gangs are after? So from a personal perspective, they're interested in stealing and getting access to things like our social media accounts, getting our login credentials for those and our emails. They want our usernames and passwords. They also want access to our photos and videos, whether it's for selling them on or blackmailing people. They want access to our files, any kind of personally identifiable information that might help them commit identity fraud would also be really useful. They're also really motivated in being able to control any IoT devices that we might have in the home. From a corporate perspective, they're very interested in being able to access and steal customer data, which might include credit card numbers, also intellectual property. Can we get the secret ingredient for Coca-Cola? Any kind of valid credentials, usernames and passwords that might let them get access to corporate networks. But they're also interested in stealing things like processing power so that they can carry out, for example, a denial of service attack, or storage space. So if they're hosting a malicious website, for example, with illegal pornography on it, they are not going to be wanting to host that on their own devices. Instead, they'll want to somehow control someone else's computer where they can store that material. They're also interested not only in controlling computers for these purposes, but also this extends to IoT and Internet of Things devices as well. If they can take control of these devices, then they are a lot more powerful with the different types of cyber attacks that they're able to carry out. So Internet of Things, I'm sure that you're familiar with this term already. So some common examples of IoT devices that people might have in the home includes things like you can get a smart toothbrush, a fridge that's perhaps got, some sort of internet browser built into it and will let you know whether the temperature of the fridge is dropping. A smart kettle that you can perhaps control remotely. You also get smart toys, Internet of Things toys as well. We're also seeing now a lot of Cities, especially in the UK, are starting to embed IoT devices into the city's assets and infrastructure. So things like traffic light management systems, power plants, and sewage plants all have devices that can be controlled remotely via the internet. So some examples of hackable IoT devices that have made it into the news include some of the examples that I've got here. There's a drone that's able to be hacked with a £40 kit. We've got a webcam that was used as part of a baby monitor that was possible for malicious hackers to hack in and be able to spy on the children, and they could talk to the children as well. Toys here down at the bottom, we had the Kayla doll that you could hack and make it say rude things to the children. And you can also hack into a smart kettle and force it to boil when it doesn't have any water in it, which could lead to some sort of safety risk. From an IoT perspective, the hackers find this tool Shodan really valuable. So Shodan is like a search engine that lets users find devices that are connected to the internet that maybe shouldn't be connected to the internet and publicly available. So it's like Google, but for IoT devices. So I've got a couple of examples here of interesting things that have been found on Shodan that's revealing information that it shouldn't. So here is an example taken from Shodan where we can see there was an X-ray machine that was hooked up to the internet, was wide open, patient data visible for anyone who connected to it. Here there was a water dam, again, wide open, connected to the internet, possible for people to connect to it and see the level of controls at a particular point in time. Authentication for this had been disabled, which meant that people could connect to it without even having to crack the password. We've got a heart rate monitor there, hydroelectric plant, crematorium as well. And, oh, sorry, the slide's getting carried away again, and a traffic light management system. So lots and lots of devices here that have been connected to the internet. They're not what we would think of as your typical computer, but there are IoT devices that help to make up the infrastructure there, which then means they're connected to the internet, but there is either no or very, very poor security has been put in place, which means it's very easy for hackers to gain access to them and use them for malicious purposes. So what's the worst that can happen in this scenario? So some of you might remember the Sony and Microsoft DDoS attacks, the distributed denial of service attack. So the Sony PlayStation network and the Microsoft Xbox network were both victims of a distributed denial of service attack on Christmas Day in 2014. So a good time ago now, but these kind of attacks are still happening on a very, very regular basis. So the group behind it, it was a hacker group called Lizard Squad. They didn't steal any data. They didn't get unauthorized access to the networks. The networks were simply unavailable, which meant that kids waking up on Christmas morning, looking forward to opening their presents, their new PlayStation, their new Xbox, and hooking them up to the network, were not able to play their games, play the devices, because the network was not working. So the network was unable to cope with the traffic load because it was being subjected to what we call distributed denial of service attack. So I just want to explore how an attack like that is possible to give you an understanding of some of the challenges that we're facing in cybersecurity today. So, for those of you, just a very kind of quick overview of how the internet works. So from a PlayStation perspective, we've got PlayStation devices. Some of them might be offline, some of them will be online, connected to the internet. They'll be sending packets of data over the network to the PlayStation server, which will be processing the request and sending data and information back to the PlayStation consoles. When we're hit with a distributed denial of service attack, what happens is that other devices appear on the network that are not actually legitimate devices. They are devices that are pretending to be PlayStations, and they are sending packets across the network, across the internet to the PlayStation server. But because of the sheer volume of packets that are being sent to the PlayStation server, the server is not able to cope with the volume of requests that it's receiving, and it simply crashes, it gives up, it's just not able to cope at all, and the network becomes unavailable for everyone that's trying to access it, even the legitimate PlayStation consoles. So obviously the PlayStation network and the Xbox networks are designed to manage lots of traffic. So you need to be able to orchestrate a massive denial of service attack in order to bring down these networks. So back in 2014, a denial of service attack that would be big enough to bring down these networks was considered to be in the region of 65 gigabytes of data per second. So typically anything over 5 gigabytes of data per second would be considered abnormal. So what does 65 gigabytes of data look like? So that's the equivalent to 4 million music tracks from Spotify and 1 million 4-minute YouTube videos and 554 million WhatsApp messages and 162,500 programs from Netflix per second. So that's a huge volume of data that needs to be sent across the network per second in order for that denial of service attack to be successful. So how on earth are the attackers actually able to generate that much data? So obviously Lizard Squad are unlikely to have access to a computer that's powerful enough to produce that volume of traffic. And even if they did, a single source denial of service attack coming from one computer is really easy to stop. So a 65 gigabyte DDoS attack would actually need over 65,000 computers to generate that traffic. The Lizard Squad themselves only consisted of 7 members. So how on earth did they manage to generate that traffic? So let's look at how they did this. So they did it using what we call botnets, which is a collection of computers that have been infected with a special type of malware or virus, which turns these computers into what we call zombies. So the malware allows these devices to be controlled remotely by what's known as a botnet herder. But the nice thing from a malware analysis perspective about botnets is that the users are completely unaware that their computers are infected. They're still able to log in, browse the internet, play games, use their device in the way that they would normally do. And they have absolutely no idea that their device is currently being controlled by someone else because they're still able to use it as they would normally. So the bots receive commands from the bot herder, which would instruct the computer or the IoT device to send multiple data packets to the victim. But this happens at such a low level that it wouldn't interrupt the owner of that device from still using their laptop to surf the internet or their PlayStation console to play games. They're still able to use that, but the bot herder behind the scenes is able to control the device to send out these packets under the radar. And it's when we take all of these packets collectively across all of the infected devices that those packets are then able to overwhelm the network and create the DDoS attack. They're able to rent them out on the internet. You can rent a botnet from as little as £4 for a short DDoS attack. There's currently an estimated 500 million computers currently infected, and a new one is joining this every 18 seconds. There's loads and loads of infected devices out there that are used to orchestrate these attacks. Sorry, my slides are getting carried away. Infected IoT devices play a huge part in these DDoS attacks. And as we are seeing more and more IoT devices joining the internet, getting into people's homes and smart cities, this is only further building these botnets that can be used for these DDoS attacks. So what's the worst that can happen? Okay, Sony PlayStation network isn't available and the Xbox network isn't available. Yeah, it just means that, you know, some people can't play their games. What is the worst that can happen from people being able to control IoT devices? So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples of cyber attacks that have affected national infrastructure. So in this first case study, we saw there was a disgruntled employee. So you'll remember at the beginning, I mentioned the risk from an insider. So the malicious hacker doesn't necessarily just have to be somebody that's outside the organization. It could also be somebody that would be considered to be a trusted employee. So with this one, we saw that a disgruntled employee actually attacked a sewage system. And this was in the Maroochydore sewage system in Australia. So they had a whole pile of IoT controlled systems, which consisted of 142 pumping stations. I've got a picture here showing what this would typically look like. They had a special purpose controlled computer at each station that consisted of an IoT device that was then able to control the valves and the alarms for the sewage plant. So you could remotely connect to these devices and decide whether the valve was going to be open, i.e. let sewage pass through, or closed. And there would also be alarms that would trigger depending on whether there was too much sewage flowing through the pipes. Now, the communications between these pumping systems and the control network was all managed remotely over the internet. So what happened in this attack was we saw there was this employee. He was very grumpy with management. He was able to release 1 million litres of raw sewage into the waterways and local parks of Maroochydore. He was driving around using a wireless laptop to send commands to these IoT devices. It was absolutely catastrophic for local marine life. There was lots of fish, etc. died. The creek water turned black and the stench was just unbearable for residents. Fortunately, he was caught, he was prosecuted, and he was sent to jail. So what we can learn from that is in that particular scenario, the computer systems were completely insecure. Their processes for managing disgruntled staff were completely inadequate. The communications that they had going to the IoT devices were not encrypted. They didn't have any logging or monitoring in place, which meant when the attack was taking place, it was impossible for them to work out where the attack was coming from. And they had no incident response plan either. So they had no way of, gaining control back of these devices when they knew that they were being controlled by someone else. Another case study that I want to cover, you might have heard of this, is the Stuxnet one. So this was a really high profile one. Where we saw a computer worm that had been written specifically to target industrial control systems. So it's a really well-known example of state-sponsored cyber terrorism. And it's highly likely with this particular example that it was the United States National Security Agency working with the Israeli government who were responsible for creating the malware. So it was an incredibly sophisticated software. It used 4 what we call zero-day attacks to infiltrate the systems. It consisted of 3 parts. There was the worm that spread. There was a link file that automated the execution of the propagated worm copies. And there was also a rootkit that was able to hide all presence of the worm from anyone that might have been looking at the system or monitoring it. The worm had originally entered the network via a USB that was plugged into a Windows PC, and from there it was able to spread across the network and get access to the industrial control systems without any other kind of need. So people didn't have to send it via email. It was just simply able to spread across the network itself. So once it had access to its target, it was able to execute the malicious code, which could then modify the machine. So what this meant was that no attempt to restart the machine or delete the malware or the worm, none of that would actually get rid of the worm. Once the worm was on the system, you were as well just binning the system completely because it was being completely controlled. The worm had the power to take full control over their the centrifuge. It could order the centrifuge to spin until it would blow up, or it could stop it altogether. It had the power to do that, but however, that was not actually what the code did. Instead, they've discovered under lab analysis that the code would replicate itself, it would create a copy, it would then check its environment to find out, am I currently on a Windows PC or am I currently on the nuclear centrifuge? It might occasionally attempt to kind of connect to the outside world and wait for a command, but mostly it lay dormant until it got to one of these PLC, the centrifuge device. So once the worm decided it was time, it would wake up and then target these working uranium enrichment centrifuges. So instead of, wreaking havoc and, blowing things up or stopping them, it was a very, very subtle operation, excuse me, where it would modify the rotor speed of the centrifuges, which would cause them to eventually malfunction. But it was so subtle that people who were working at the plant had no idea that this was caused by a deliberate attack. They just thought that perhaps the systems that they had built were failing and they didn't understand why. It was also able to target the pressure of the UF6 gas that's used to enrich uranium, again, just enough to start turning some of that gas into small solid pieces of rock, which then meant that these centrifuges were guaranteed to fail. The absolute cherry on the top with this code is that it was able to record the last 21 seconds of when the centrifuges were working correctly. And it would then just keep pushing those correct results back to the monitoring system. So the monitoring systems weren't picking up that there was any problem at all. And the first thing that they noticed was a problem was when the systems actually failed. So this malware, this piece of worm, led to the failure of over 1,000 of Iran's nuclear centrifuges at an enrichment facility in Iran, which completely set back by about a decade their nuclear program. So again, what can we learn from this? So Stuxnet was the first worm that we had seen, which was specifically designed to target industrial machines. It showed us that an air-gapped network that's not connected to the internet directly is not immune to infection. If it's connected to other parts of the network that maybe do have that connection, or maybe somebody can plug in a USB stick, then they are at risk. We also saw that it's possible to target infrastructure. It's not just your normal kind of working organization like a bank that can be hit with a cyber attack. We also saw this was an incredibly sophisticated piece of code. They reckon it had been written by a team of about 10 programmers that had been working together for years to develop this really, really advanced piece of code. We can see that cyber weapons then have the potential to cause mass disruption to industrial systems. So from a future perspective, we can see that cyber attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated. We can also see that organized gangs are recognizing the financial benefits of cybercrime. We're seeing an increasing novelty and intelligence in the types of attacks that we're seeing, with far, far better tools underpinning them. And we're also seeing that there is a shift in these attacks towards IoT devices, smart cities that are using these IoT devices, and industrial control systems. And this is because the default security on these is typically really, really poor, and updating them is really hard. I think as we start moving over to 5G, we're going to see an increase in the deployment of unsecured IoT devices. That higher bandwidth could end up leading to an increase in the distributed denial of service attacks that we see and their potential impact. the cybersecurity community anticipate that 25% of cyber attacks will focus on IoT devices over the next few years. So I want to stress that nothing is ever going to be 100% secure. So we must consider security from the outset when designing a new system. This is part of the Scottish Government's new framework for cyber resilience. We need to consider security from the beginning when we design, and not just think about it at the end once these systems are already in place. We need more people with cybersecurity skills. This problem is not going to go away. I just want to finish up with a slide here about the cybersecurity skills shortage. So this was produced by ISC Squared. It was published just at the end of 2020. So they do an analysis every year where they study the cybersecurity skills gap across the globe. So last year, they reckoned there was an estimated shortage of 3.12 million cybersecurity professionals. They've also estimated 63% of businesses are lacking the cybersecurity skills to keep threats at bay, and 60% of respondents said that their companies are at moderate or extreme risk of cybersecurity attacks as a result of this shortage. We need more people to get into cybersecurity to help address this problem. That's all from me this morning. I'm very happy to take any questions from any of you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for such a knowledgeable presentation. So we are now moving towards the Q&A session. The first question which we got from a student who wants to ask, would I be eligible for any course as I already did graduation from UK in 2012?
So is this about joining our masters?
Yeah. He did his graduation from UK in 2012. Now he wants to do the masters from your university. Is he eligible?
It should be. So for our masters, we need people who have an undergraduate that covers some aspect of computing. So if in his undergraduate degree he's done programming and some networking, then yes, I think that would map our entry requirements. Is that correct, Janice?
Yeah, the only thing is, what do you think about the time delay, Natalie? Because that's a good number of years, unless he's been working in industry, in terms of updating skills.
So do you know, Deepika, if he's been working in industry since 2012?
Yeah, since then he has the work experience. So is he eligible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably,
if he's got work experience as well, then yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. The next question. So, ma'am, can I get a scholarship? I have CGPA of 9.1 and I also have a certification in ethical hacking from India.
I'll answer that one. Basically, we offer students from South Asia a scholarship of £3,000 per year, and that applies whether you're going for a bachelor course or a master's course.
Thank you, Janice. The next question. What placement opportunities do we have after completing masters in cybersecurity?
In terms of placement, in the UK, generally speaking, students find their own jobs at the end of their course, but we would normally give them lots of support and help towards that. And as Natalie was saying, there's obviously a very big gap in terms of the number of vacancies and the number of qualified students. So it wouldn't be a case of just doing a short internship somewhere and making the tea. It would be a case of going into a proper career-driven job. Would you agree with that, Natalie?
Yes, absolutely. So we try where possible, where the students do master's projects, to get our industry partners provide some of the project briefs for that, so that even if the students don't have an internship opportunity through their master's project, they can still get that experience of working with an organization that they can then put on their CV. And through the cyber quarter that I mentioned at the beginning as well, there's going to be lots of opportunities through that for students to work with organizations. I mean, we find typically with master's students that because it's only a 12-month program, that there's not really time for them to do an internship unless they were to delay or suspend their studies. But there's lots and lots of opportunities for them to work with companies during their coursework and their assessments.
Thank you, Janice and Natalie. The next question, I want to know the eligibility and admission process for Indian students to apply for UG cybersecurity.
I'll take that one. It's really, we're looking for a good grade in maths at 12th and a good overall percentage, probably minimum of about 65% in 12th and at least 65% in maths. Maths is the key subject. We also ask for an English language qualification like Ielts or Pearson, and that's one of the prerequisites. We don't offer a waiver for English.
Thank you, Janice. The next question. What is the IELTS requirement for Masters in Cybersecurity? Is it for 1 year?
The Master's course is 1 year, yes.
Thank you, Janice. The next question. I have 10 years of experience in software engineering. Can I apply for Masters? Will I be eligible for the post-study work visa?
They would need to have a computing degree initially if they want to apply for a Master's, or the equivalent of a degree, I would imagine. Would you agree with that, Natalie?
Yes, I think if ideally a computing degree, if not another degree, and then if we're able to map their software development experience onto what we would anticipate students would cover in a computing degree, then we could look at doing it that way. I'm not sure what the situation is with the visa, the post-work visa. Do you know, Janice?
Yeah, the post-study work visa applies if you come to the UK and start in September. After that, we're waiting to see what the story is.
Thank you, Janice and Natalie. The next question. Do you have student accommodation? If so, how can I apply?
You would do that as once you make an application to Abertay and get an offer, you'll be sent a link to apply for accommodation. We have plenty of accommodation available for international students, so that's not a real issue. Are there any technical questions about cybersecurity, Deepika?
Yes, there's one question the student want to ask. What is the scope after doing Masters in Cybersecurity? How does the Abertay outstand from other universities? Will the classes be face-to-face in September 2021? Are the admissions still open for September 2021?
So I'll answer the first question in terms of what makes Abertay different. So our approach towards cybersecurity is we take the offensive cybersecurity approach with the ethical hacking. So some universities will typically cover network defenses, and their master's degrees are more focused on the defensive approaches that organizations can take. So looking at, for example, implementing strong firewall rules. At Abertay, we are particularly interested in looking at cybersecurity from an offensive perspective. So how can we look at identifying vulnerabilities in a system? So it's more about understanding how a system could be broken to then be able to recommend how it can be improved. So our kind of unique approach is that offensive angle rather than defensive. Sorry, what were the other questions?
Yeah, the student want to ask the classes will be face-to-face, and how does Abertay University outstand from other universities? And what is the deadline of 2021 September intake? Okay, so the deadline, sorry, Janice, on you go.
In terms of making an application, you'd really need to apply in the next couple of weeks. A lot of the courses are reaching sort of the sort of maximum numbers, so I would suggest an application in the next, certainly before the middle of July.
So with regards to face-to-face in September, what we're planning at the moment, I think under the government's guidelines, we're hoping that we'll be able to have students in classes under 1 meter social distancing. So what we're planning at the moment, we obviously have no idea what the situation will be like in September, but we are planning to offer the students 2 hours face-to-face sessions per module per week. So for the master students, they should get a minimum of 6 hours contact time face-to-face with staff. They would also be able to, if it's permitted within government guidelines, get access to the university resources outside of that. And we would also have online resources as well. So where we can't have class sessions, in addition to the 6 hours, we'll have online support available for students. But at the moment, I think we really just have to kind of wait and see. But that's what we're working towards, is a minimum of 6 hours a week. And then with regards to what sets us aside from others, I think I covered that with the offensive and defensive approach. We've also got the cyber quarter that I mentioned, which is the 18 million investment in creating this cybersecurity hub that our master's students will be a part of. And we're also one of only a handful of universities in the UK that are recognised by the National Cybersecurity Centre as that academic centre of excellence.
And just to add to that, Natalie, we were the world's first ever university to do an ethical hacking course, and we have vast experience in the field. I mean, it's what, about 12 years now, more than that?
I think it's 15
years of experience, and we obviously have state-of-the-art labs that students can play about in without actually causing World War IV.
Yes, we've got our ethical hacking lab. We're over the 15 years of running the course, we've amassed a huge collection of malware, hacking tools. There's lots and lots of things that students can get their hands dirty with. We encourage students to kind of think of it as being like a kind of hacker's playground, where you can play around with these tools in a safe environment without worrying that you're breaking the law.
Thank you, Natalie and Janice. The next question, student want to ask that for applying for masters in cybersecurity, does he need to have a background in IT, or if not recommended, does he available, like, does he can do business and economics field? He can opt for business and economics field?
No.
No, we would need that background in IT.
Okay, so I have 3 questions from a student. He wants to ask, I am from India. I already have 4+ years of experience in UK under ICT Tier 2 and current expired back to India. Ielts is necessary for me. Next question, I have experience in network voice. Does my experience count after completing cybersecurity? Third question, I have experience in network voice for 12 years. Does my experience count after completing cybersecurity for job or job opportunity?
Do you know the answer to the Ielts one,
normally you need Ielts if you haven't either lived or worked in the UK. If he's actually been resident in the UK and has had a work visa, then it's likely that we could consider that in lieu of Ielts. But we'll look at each case on an individual basis. As far as the networking background is concerned, you would obviously need to do a master's. You have to initially have a bachelor degree. And that would normally need to be in a computing or a computing related subject. If it was just relevant work experience and networking, I don't know, Natalie, what would you think? It would depend on the individual situation, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think we'd need to look at the application and see how it maps to what we're looking for.
Okay, and the same student want to ask, program language is required? If so, which languages to prepare?
We don't need the students to be proficient with any particular language. We just assume that they have programming knowledge of kind of general programming constructs. So any language that a student has programmed in would be useful. Some of the things that the students might find useful when they're on the course is Python scripting. I think they might do a little bit of C as well, but we assume with that they haven't necessarily done the C programming language before, but we would assume that they are comfortable with programming terms.
Thank you, Natalie. The next question, will it be possible to do masters in cybersecurity with an emphasis on IoT security and machine learning?
So a third of the credits for the Masters is from the students' Masters project, and we encourage the students to, if they want to pick their own project, as long as it comes within that cybersecurity umbrella. We have staff with expertise in machine learning and cybersecurity. So yes, absolutely, it would be possible for a student to specialise in that. So we actually have, we've been working with a company called PA Consulting at the moment, who have given us some IoT devices explicitly for master students to work on in their project.
Thank you, Natalie. So the last two questions the student wants to ask regarding the COVID situation and the COVID cases related to UK market. And also the student want to ask about the how many days of quarantine is required once we come on a student visa.
I'll answer those questions, but my answer will not be the one that you want. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're now nearly at the end of June. About a month ago, the UK had hardly any cases. Then obviously with the Delta variant, they've gone up again. So we don't quite know what the position is going to be in September. At the moment, there are numbers of countries that are under the red list, which is probably the majority of the world at the moment. Vaccination, for example, there's no sort of legal requirement to be vaccinated as far as we know. As far as quarantine is concerned, we'll have to wait until nearer the time to find out what the government guidelines will be, whether students will have to quarantine, and if they do, where they'll have to quarantine. So quite a few unknowns still.
Thank you so much. Yeah, please, Janice, what do you want to say?
The only other thing I would say is that if students are applying to us, we will keep them posted with any developments as they come along. Because obviously we know people are worried and anxious, and there are all sorts of things that we may be able to do to help out the situation.
Thank you, Janice. So we are now towards the end of this Q&A session. So anything else you both want to put forward for the students who are watching us live right now?
Nothing else from me?
No, I think Natalie's covered all the bases there. If students are interested, Deepika, if you just ask them to contact us directly, and we'll be happy to give them any information or have a sort of one-to-one chat with them about any issues that they might have. But as I said, we are probably reaching a stage where we have nearly all of our places offers are going out for. So if they want to apply for the master's course, they should do it as soon as they possibly can. And you can do that quite simply online. You just click on the apply now. You can list SI UK as your agent on the form, so there's no difficulty there, but it just means that there won't be a mad dash at the end.
Thank you so much, Janice and Natalie. So we are now towards the end of the seminar. I would like to mention to all the students who are watching us right now, please feel free to contact SI UK offices, India, for any queries you want to ask. Our counselors are always ready to help you. So we are ending this seminar right over here. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your special time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.